you have to know who you are, and you have to be willing to stand up for who you are. And at the same time, you know that a lot of people aren't going to like that. But if you're your authentic self, then that's the best that you can do. But all mine's live. I've done live TV for 8 years, 4 nights a week. I've never used a script, and they ask you questions and you give the answers, and you don't know what the questions are.
Oh my God. So you're so prepped and ready to go for this because you're so used to it.
It's my job.
I am so excited to ask you more about that, Ben. But
it's I never talk about myself, so different.
Yeah. Well, we're going to start by getting right into that about you and how you grew up.
So it's a great topic, growing up. How did you grow up? So I live in Melbourne now. I lived in Sydney for a really long time as well, but I'm originally from Western Australia. And the question is not where I grew up, but how. And I like that question, being how rather than where. I grew up in country, Western Australia. My mother was a politician. My father worked internationally. And that gave me a really good sense of the world and the globalized news and current affairs marketplace. When growing up in the 80s in a small country town in Western Australia, there wasn't really much other opportunity to be exposed to the world. Australia has come such a long way since then in terms of the knowledge people have and the travel that they do and the issues that they're exposed to. But because my father worked all over the world, he was constantly bringing me back magazines and from England and America and the Middle East. And back in those days, there were VHS tapes. And he always used to bring me home the British Top of the Pops and magazines. And I think I have one of the first newspapers photo shoots that Kate Moss ever did in one of the British papers that Dad brought home from me in about 1993 and said, there's this girl in London, everybody's talking about her, she's going to be the next big thing. And he brought me that newspaper home, and it was Kate Moss, and I still have it somewhere at home. So I was the only 9-10-year-old kid probably in country Western Australia who was begging their father for Levi 501s, which are back in fashion again. Now the 90s are back. And, like Doc Martens, way back when, 1988, 89, because I was getting it from all the British magazines. So I was really up with it pre-teen in country Western Australia. And that's kind of how I came to be a journalist. I always was really interested in everything my father brought home that I could consume about the world.
Where's the town that you grew up in?
I grew up in a small town called Bridgetown in the southwest corner of Western Australia. So it's a town of about 4,000 people.
And how?
And my mum was one of the local MPs for many, many, many years. So I had a great domestic local community influence combined with my dad's international influence. So it was a really interesting melding to grow up with.
How far from Perth is the town?
It's 3 hours from Perth.
3-hour drive.
Mm-hmm.
And then Perth is the most isolated city in the world, right?
Yeah. And back then, so I left the town when I was 17, went to the city. I became a secretary for 6 years and part-time university, paid my way through school, and then I became a journalist. And there was only, the TV stations in Perth weren't even on the national grid. There was no national media out of Western Australia. They were all privately owned stations and networks with copy share agreements. Channel 10 didn't come along until the 90s, and even further still in Western Australia. 9 was owned by Bruce Gordon. 7 was owned by Kerry Stokes. It still is. There was one news radio station, 6PR. Was a very isolated market. The mining boom had yet to really occur, so there were no international corporations. There was only half the buildings that there are now. Very, very much was a small town. And so when I graduated university, I became a journalist at 6PR, and I was really lucky to get a job in news and current affairs at one of the only available places where people could get a job in news and current affairs. So I was really, really fortunate. But back then, a lot of people from Western Australia, if you had ambitions to do something that wasn't related to mining, you really did have to leave.
And what was your dad's job?
So my dad was in oil and gas.
And what was the platform that your mum, or what party was your mum part of?
So my mum was part of the Liberal Party. So I grew up with a very conservative, liberal background, both of my parents. And I still have that today. It's tweaked a little bit around the edges because I've lived in the city, for so long, many cities, Melbourne, Sydney, Canberra, and I've become exposed to, more issues, but I think I always will hold on to where I grew up and the people I grew up with in a tiny town of, 4,000. As I said, I was really lucky. My father worked internationally. We lived there because my mum's family was there, but most of the families in the town were connected to traditional agricultural industries that a lot of them don't exist now. Coal mining, forestry. A lot of those industries have been shut down from that part of the world. There's a lot of people still in transition 20 years after those shutdowns first began. And when I go to Canberra and I talk about politics, and when I sit in front of clients and I talk about politics, and when I talk about politics in the media, I always hold on to those people that I grew up with because, that's where I'm from. And that gives me a great view of what the actual effects of a lot of these policy decisions are on people who have worked in those industries their whole life, and governments are making decisions to transition those industries out of existence, and it is decimating communities. And yes, there's another point of view of that, but because I'm from there, I'll always hold to, my argument is always going to include the effects on those communities and those towns.
And what did your mum do before she went into politics? Or what prompted her to go into it?
Interestingly, for a Conservative politician, she was a social worker. So she worked in the Department of Child Protection, which is an unusual occupation for someone of a Conservative persuasion. And then years later, she ended up being the Minister for Child Protection. And I still believe probably the only child protection minister that Australia has ever had that actually was a child protection caseworker in the department. So it was really interesting. But before she did that, she was a stay-at-home mum and I guess a community activist, very community focused. And, that gave me my grounding. Politics is about community, and we often want it to be glamorous and exciting, but it isn't. It's about community and grassroots and doing those things that really do make a difference for people.
And what were the main things she cared about back then?
I suppose because of her background, she was very much into she had 4 young kids. I was the oldest, so very much into community activities and conserving community facilities and services, childcare, kindergartens, making sure roads and playgrounds are safe, which is really different to me, having worked in politics for so long and eventually running for federal parliament. A lot of women get their start in politics, getting involved in services and facilities in their local community that is related to children and childcare and child health, or playgrounds, or child development, a lot of those types of issues. And for me, I don't have any kids, and so I am one of, I suppose, a woman who worked in politics and ran for politics that wasn't able to rely on getting my start that way. And it's still the most common way for women to get their start in politics, on all sides of politics, and even independent and Greens, a lot of these environmental issues that they begin their activist journey on, or if their mums are related to, things that affect the environment around their kids. And so it's really hard to kind of find a way in politics to start if you're a woman and you don't get that traditional start in that sector, in that area.
Mm-hmm. I'm just thinking on that point about, it's really interesting on that point about jobs within communities when they're focused on one particular sector, and then when that transition has to happen, which is not just for environmental reasons or whatever. It's also happening now. People are freaking out about AI or whatever. There's always a new technology that comes in that disrupts.
Yeah, commercialization drives a lot of things, not just concerns around environment or consumption. Yeah.
And so I was just going to point out to the audience, I had a conversation with Peter Costello on this podcast, he's talking about the coal mines, or that industry around Newcastle, and how that adaptation happens, because people are often, it is that job thing, but it's we have to adapt, and it's what role is the government in there to help people adapt? And because at some point it's okay, we're not still, the classic example is the horse and cart. It's the person making the cart is very upset about cars coming along, but it's obviously at some point that job no longer exists. But it's to what extent? It's how do we solve that problem, and what involvement should the government have in helping solve that problem? And I guess that's what I'm interested in asking you when you mentioned the conservative values at home. Because this term, especially I think it gets very confused with liberal, liberal in the US means progressive, whereas liberal here is more the values of this podcast, which is speaking freely and promoting free trade and freedom of association and free religion and whatever. And then conservative, but then the Liberal Party in Australia is associated with conservative values, but conservative values are a bit different. So what were those values for you in your home growing up?
Look, conservative values for me are really, I think that if you work hard to generate wealth for your family, you shouldn't be punished for that. You should be able to keep most of that wealth that you've taken personal responsibility and worked hard and skilled yourself and committed to providing for yourself, your family, or your community. I firmly believe in a marketplace that is not overindulged by union influence and taxation. I believe in the safety net of health and education, but there has been in Australia from time to time levies placed on people who earn certain thresholds, who live in certain geographic areas, who do certain jobs. and I'm not a supporter of singling out cohorts of the community to punish for doing nothing but building wealth and generating economic returns for the rest of the community. So that's a very simple analysis of my conservative values. They come tinged with feminism and they come tinged with believing in the safety net, but overall, believing in the free market, the less union interference, the better. Unions had a place in Australia when they were protecting vulnerable workers. They are now a mechanism for highly ambitious Labor politicians to enter Parliament and grandstand. And I think we've lost the union working class or blue collar, for want of a better term, the union official in Australia that sticks up for workers, that negotiates with employers in good faith to deliver pragmatic outcomes for workers because those workers are being taken advantage of. That generation is over, and unions now exist for political gain, for political ideology, and for political ambition of people who want to climb the ranks through the Labor Party and make media appearances.
And did your parents talk to you about these things growing up, or did you just kind of absorb it from what was going on around you?
I come from a highly engaged political family. My dad was politically engaged internationally, so we used to watch the TV every night, the world news, and think about, that's where Dad is today. So I had the international current affairs and events from my father. My mum's family, very, very engaged in domestic politics. My grandfather, quite a large farmer. So he wasn't National Party, he always was from the Liberal Party, but very, very focused on agricultural politics, Australia's export sector. I remember as a very young girl spending a lot of time out on the farm, in the wool sheds, working with the shearing teams and learning about the splitting of CBH bulk handling and the formation of GrainCorp. And, the privatisation of Australia's grains industry. It was, the mid-'80s, a really interesting time for agriculture in Australia, and we always talked about it. And
you were interested in it?
Well, part of it, it's a chicken and an egg, isn't it? So my mum was a politician, studied politics, and she studied politics at a time where I was probably a little sponge, consuming a lot of information. And, certainly I used to listen to my dad a lot. And, anything that could drive your intellect in a small town in country Western Australia, you were going to try and grab onto it and do something with that.
And was there kind of a pressure from them to influence you that you should adopt the same kind of thinking, or it was encouraged that you can, debate these things?
I don't think that they. I mean, look, obviously myself and my three siblings have all grown up now. My sister votes Greens. My brother votes Independent every time. My other sister is, a firm capitalist. So I think that, but, my mum came from a social worker background as well. So we always had an interesting dichotomy of, this is what we believe, but, we're aware that there are other issues out there and other people have disadvantages and there's reasons for that, whereas I feel that I feel that it was always balanced.
Yeah. And what were you like at school? Like, I'm just wondering if it was, I guess you had your siblings, but if you're like learning about this whole other world from your dad and you're in quite a part of the world that's isolated and you're, you know, getting all this different fashion, did that make you feel like a bit of an outsider at school?
I didn't feel like an outsider. I felt that I didn't feel like an outsider, but I felt lucky. You know, it was a bit weird. You know, it was like, oh, Christy's gone to the airport again. You know, no one went to the airport because no one could afford it. No one went anywhere. And, you know, it was 3 hours away. So to go to the international airport on such a regular basis, that was probably weird to people. I became acutely aware that, you know, things my family did were a bit different to what other people's family did. But you don't know what you don't know.
Mm-hmm. And then did your parents have any kind of influence on what you would do after school, or it was it was known like you would go off to Perth and you would figure it out?
Well, I was, you know, having been exposed to this bigger world my whole life, I was very eager to leave the small one that I was in, and I didn't go to university, and as I said, I became a secretary for 6 years. And my first job was at PricewaterhouseCoopers. It was actually Pricewaterhouse back then before it merged with Coopers and Lybrand. And I was a junior EA to the tax partner who used to look after Alan and Craig Bond. And so that was my very first job, looking after the Bond family. That's pretty much what I did exclusively working in the office of this tax partner. And then I left and I went to work in the private family office of a entrepreneur in Perth, who's a BRW rich lister still to this day, who had a number of private family holdings. So I went to work for him. And then I continued my studies and I was working full time in the private family office, learning about wealth management and investment. And I really, really enjoyed it. And I was just doing admin. And then I became a journalist when I graduated from university. But I worked in admin for 6 years in a number of sectors.
And why did you choose to do that rather than study full time?
I think I enjoyed it. I didn't plan to do it for that long, but I enjoyed doing it. I enjoyed the work. I enjoyed the exposure it gave me to professional life. Obviously, I got paid and I was supporting myself, living 3.5 hours away from where I grew up, and I was living in the city and had done so since I was 17 and a half. And so it just became a way of life, and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the exposure to the professional tasks that it gave me and the people that I met, and the things I learned. And I still utilise these things I learn today. And I will forever, ever, always, in any job I've ever had, be very gracious to administration staff, because I was one.
So what prompted the initial decision? Was it out of necessity, like you were going to need to work to support yourself living independently?
Really? Yeah.
And
yeah.
And at the same time, that was like exciting to you to be able to earn money for yourself.
Yeah, it was exciting to me. Absolutely. Yeah. It was exciting. But yes, I supported myself. I don't really know how I did it now, but I did.
Yeah, because I was pretty young, 17 and a half.
Where were you living? I was renting a house with friends, and by 18, I was renting my own house in my own name, and renting it out to other people
Nice.
and working during the day and studying at night time.
Okay, and then so what was your entry into journalism like?
Interestingly, so my boss at the time in the private family office had a marketing manager. That marketing manager had to take some unexpected leave, and we needed to write a investment prospectus. And for some reason, it landed with me, and they said, "Can you just try and do something with this?" And so I wrote it. And he called me in, and I thought that I was going to get chastised for doing something quite bad, because I wasn't a very good secretary and I used to make a lot of mistakes. So I thought, oh, God, you found out about something. So he called me and he said, "Did you write this?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "This is excellent." And I said, "Thank you." And he said, "Why are you the secretary?" And I said, "Well, I've just done it for a few years and I like doing it and I like working here." And he said, "You need to go to university." And I said, "Yeah, I was thinking about that when I left school, yeah, but I like doing this." And he said, "You must go to university, Kristy. Like this, if you can write this, I can't let you be doing what you're doing at your age." And so he said to me, "I will get another assistant. She can help you. You can work here 3 days a week. You can go to university the rest of the time, and we'll help you do that."
Great.
Which was incredible.
And why did you not initially think that you should go to university? Did you have pressure from your parents to make any decision around that?
No, I didn't. I very much could have done whatever I wanted. I just was excited about the world. I was a young girl. I wanted to get into life and get a job and earn money and dress up in nice clothes and experience things, and that's what I did. But after a while, yes, I did have a sense that I've done this for a while now, and I probably should study. Which I did. It's not for everyone, but if you want to, you should find a way to do it. If you don't want to, well, that's, also fine.
Yeah, I guess it's interesting because for some people, the default assumption is like uni, and then it probably should be more thought through of like, well, it's not necessarily right for everyone, and depending, because then some people end up feeling like failures because they go and study even though maybe it's not what they wanted to do.
Well, it's not for everyone. I think there's far too much emphasis in Australia on people being degree qualified. So much so that universities were funded by governments successively to offer degrees that are of no use in the economy. And also universities were in a really big hurry to transition things that used to be on-the-job learning. For example, journalism cadetships used to be like an apprenticeship. You would go into a newsroom at 15, they would teach you, you would learn on the job. It really is at its core an on-the-job learning skill. But they turned it into a degree and melded it with sociology and art theory, and it is of no use. You walk into a newsroom and you have to start that training all over again. So there was a great deal of pressure to get people into the university sector and the university system when a lot of jobs didn't need to be degree qualified jobs. And I think the education system as well facilitates people striving towards getting an ATAR, despite them being really talented at other things that they could pursue as a career.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result, we're crying out for trades. Our national skills priority list is full of trades-based occupations that are around Australia that we cannot fill. In Western Australia, where I'm from, where a lot of people have made the decision that doing a trade that will see them have lucrative salaries from the mining industry they're doing extremely well. The mining industry has a talent shortfall like every other industry in Australia because of immigration stopping. And people are making significant salaries. And they enjoy what they do, and they're trades qualified, which is a ticket to work anywhere in the world, very much like a degree. So I think Australia's starting to realise, but, you know, is that trickling down to parents maybe encouraging their kids who are good at other things to pursue things other than university if they're going to struggle at university?
Mm-hmm. And so you studied journalism?
I studied communications, which included journalism and art theory and cultural studies and sociology and anything they could else make into a communications degree, which, you know, when I went to work in Canberra, I thought, oh, gosh, like, you know, this degree I did, everybody else had been to Oxford and to Cambridge and fancy schools in Sydney and Melbourne, and I had only done one degree from Western Australia. So it's the whole reason I did my master's degree. And I thought I'd better do something useful and intellectual because communications is really, you know, a discipline. Even though I have it, I still don't believe it is. And I don't believe it's an applicable sort of intellectual discipline. It is in parts, but, you know, the practicality of it, as i.e. being a good journalist or being good at marketing, is not drawn from that you having a degree in it. It's drawn from your natural talent and aptitude to do those things. Communications academia, absolutely, yes, a discipline, but the practical work of it is not. So I studied politics and public policy, so I could understand how policy was made in a comparative public policy context around the world, and politics, because I really enjoyed it.
So at what point did you do that?
I did that when I went to Canberra when I was a junior staffer, and I did that part-time at night time, sleeping in the office in Parliament House and going in on Sundays and making use of the Parliamentary Library, and that is how I did it. So we would work really long hours during the week, from like 6:30 to 11 during the week, and I would try and fit in my study after that and on the weekends, and so I pretty much lived in the office, yeah, and to finish it.
And what prompted the decision to go to Canberra?
You know, I loved politics and I loved the news, and that's where you go.
Sorry, go on.
Anyone who loves politics and the news in Canberra and wants to be part of it goes there.
Had you been involved in politics in Perth?
I had been, yeah. I was the Federal Secretary of the Young Liberals of Australia.
So since moving there, you'd been active in that way?
I was in Western Australia growing up. I was. Again, really unusual for a graduate journalist. It doesn't necessarily attract young people who are of the conservative persuasion. But because I had worked in the private sector for such a long time and worked hard to support myself and study at night time, that probably reinforced my conservative views and my conservative values of personal responsibility, and if you want something, you work for it. And because that's exactly what I did, and it was hard, and I didn't take any of it for granted, and I took all the opportunities that were given to me. And so that formed, you know, my adult view.
And did you find peers who had the same values and who were there involved because they cared about personal responsibility and you know, smaller government, or not, you know, being able to build your own wealth and not just having it. Like, all these things, because I'm asking because some of the, like, I guess the small exposure I've had to young people involved in politics is there's a lot of people who are in there maybe not because of their values, but for some kind of other reason. Or maybe that's changed now compared to when you were getting into it.
Look, I still think that, you know, with the numbers of people who join political parties now, I mean, you know, the union movement is only 14% of the population, and that would be on par with the motivated number of people who want to join the Liberal Party. Political parties all round are reducing in numbers and membership attraction and retention. So I still think if you join, you're really motivated to join for a reason of either a single issue or because it aligns with your values. In Victoria, we have seen a lot of people join the Liberal Party because they're really angry at the Andrews government COVID response. Likewise, we've seen a lot of people in Victoria join fringe parties on the edge of our major political spectrum because they're really angry at the Andrews government COVID response. So people are motivated to join political parties when they do so, because nobody really joins just because. So I still think young people, if they're joining, there's so many other competing interests for their time, their effort, and their emotional buy-in that they have to be interested on some level to heed that call to action to actually join up.
Yeah, okay, I guess I'm getting confused because I'm thinking about the kind of political groups at Cambridge. So that's within like a student, that's students joining, and it kind of seems to be people who, yeah, it's not necessarily values, it's more like they love debating, or they love, you know, it's in their family, and they actually just want to stand up in front of people and say outrageous things that they don't necessarily agree. You know, there's a lot of this kind of immaturity that I guess that's very different to joining the actual political party.
Oh, well, that doesn't change. I mean, there's plenty of people in political parties who want to stand up and say outrageous things that they don't necessarily believe in. Gosh. And that's increasingly getting more and more and more common. Because the more outrageous you are, the more tweets you get and the more hits you have, and, you know, the more likes you garner and the more influence you have from doubling down your bet within a small cohort of people. So you find your niche that way. That's a very easy way of tackling politics. But real politics is finding the middle and finding the center and convincing people that there is merit in coming to the center and the middle. It's very easy to grandstand on the fringe and be supported by your own echo chamber. So that doesn't change one bit. That carries all the way through from student politics at Cambridge to the United Nations and everywhere in between.
Huh. Hey, were you ever tempted, or have you ever been tempted to say outrageous things that you don't necessarily agree with? Or maybe have you said things in the moment that you're kind of like, actually, that I just kind of got caught up?
I always try to. I do always say things I believe in. A lot of the times I come away from it thinking, oh, I'm really going to cop a lot of heat for that. But I then say, yeah, but I meant it, you know, or maybe sometimes I think I wasn't so articulate in expressing that, or I could have expressed that sentiment in a better way. But hopefully people understood what I was trying to say. Running for federal parliament in Australia is, we've got a really binary culture now where the activism of people who want to pile on and misinterpret and not give you the benefit of the doubt is very mobilized. And so I have felt at times, unfairly maligned for things that I have said where people have not listened to the context or not wanted to give me the benefit of the doubt on the sentiment that I was seeking to convey, perhaps in a way that was a bit inarticulate. But, I've been on television for 8 years, live TV. I don't get the questions or the scripts. We talk about political issues. I learned a very long time ago that you're on live TV. That stays with you forever on the internet, in the archives, particularly with digital media. Anybody can find anything that you have said. And so you have to be happy with what you've said, or at least, admit that maybe you're a bit inarticulate, but always convey the sentiment that you feel authentic about. And if you don't say it. All being said, a lot of people get a really big check these days by being as outrageous as they can be and saying things that they don't necessarily believe to get paid a lot of money. I don't get paid a lot of money. And I always say to myself, you got to come home and look in the mirror and think, yeah, I did myself proud today. I wish I didn't say it quite like that, but I haven't said something I don't mean.
Yeah. So that's like Piers Morgan or someone like that who's paid basically to create.
Undoubtedly. Outrage. I don't know Piers Morgan, and I don't know half the people on GB, but I am betting that there is at least a smattering of people within that cohort that know the more outrageous they are, the more traction they generate by saying things they don't mean, the more they get paid.
And maybe it's like they find it fun, which in fact, if anyone who's listening to this who knows me, it's like I used to kind of be that, like I would find it fun to say stuff to like get reactions out of people. But then at some point I'm like, actually, some people get upset and blah, blah, blah. It's not worth it. And I can't be bothered.
Yeah, of course it's fun, right? And, a lot of these things but one person's outrageousness is another person's perfectly reasonable. So it's subjective. And one person's offence is another person's view of, yes, finally, somebody is speaking my language. And so that's the model of, cable TV that we do now. And, I'm on cable TV. I'm not knocking it. It's given me an amazing career opportunities. But, I suppose for me, I always knew that I wanted to run for federal parliament at some point in my life. And so I was always really conscious of being my authentic self. That's over now. So, yeah, I can be as outrageous as I want. Only joking. I've still been my authentic self. I run a business as well, and I run a PR and communications and government engagement company, and so that's really important for me to protect my brand, say what I believe in, and be my authentic self. But yeah, of course, the media environment is now increasingly split, and there is a very lucrative niche for people being outrageous and controversial.
Yeah, so I guess because I think it's similar with this podcast, but obviously on a totally different level, but I am just trying to have a conversation, say what I'm genuinely thinking at the time, but it's so annoying when it's like the inarticulation or whatever, when you just say you listen back and it's like, wow, the thoughts in my head are not matching like the words that came out, and obviously you are much better at that, and I guess it just comes with training and practice and whatever, but also just saying the wrong thing. Like sometimes you can just say the wrong date or something and it's just a mistake. But I guess you must have a lot of self-compassion to then not beat yourself up and to say yeah, it's like the intention was there, right? It's like I was saying what was true to me and what I thought and what with the information I had at the time. And even if it didn't come out right, it was the right intention, so I can still sleep at night or something like that.
You want people to give you the benefit of the doubt for having the right intention and taking the context of things of which it was meant. And also, if people are upset with you for that intention that you had, then they're upset with you. You know, you there's a benefit of coming to a certain age where you think, you know, I've been my authentic self. I've been balanced. I've considered the other person's argument. I still believe in my own point of view. I think it's informed. I'm going to stand up for it. Then so be it, you know?
Yeah.
And politics is... now, I didn't get elected. I didn't, but I've been a lobbyist for a long time. I've been on a political network on TV for 8 years. And I've, you know, run for federal parliament. And so, you know, you do get a sense of, after time, you have to know who you are and you have to be willing to stand up for who you are. And at the same time, you know that a lot of people aren't going to like that. But if you're your authentic self, then, you know, that's the best that you can do.
Mm-hmm. And I guess as well, if you're open, when you're not speaking just to deliberately be controversial, then it means you're saying what's true to you, but you're also open. Like, it's informed, but then if someone else can present new information or you can, you know, develop your thinking further and you're open to that, and then you can, like, learn and grow, and then it's great. Because it's like, yeah, cool, that was me 8 years ago saying that, but I didn't, you know, now it's evolved. And
yeah, and people can evolve. And, you know, the most terrible thing about our digital media now, having been entrenched for, you know, 25 years. I mean, when I first went to work at Parliament, we didn't have 24-hour news. We didn't have digital media. We got our first BlackBerries in 2007. And even then, we would only get one email a week. And if we got an email on the BlackBerry or someone called you on it, it was a really important announcement from the Prime Minister. And you just... had none of what you just had none of what exists today. And a lot of it was dealing with people on a personal one-to-one basis. We used to deal with politicians and media on a one-to-one basis because we didn't have this immediacy of communication. So you would not have so much risk of being taken out of context because you were generally having conversations with people on the phone or in a face-to-face way, whereas now it's through Twitter. I mean, first it was email, now it's Twitter, which has even condensed, you know, people's sentiment and words into so many characters, which has opened it up to so much more misinterpretation of context and intent. And also, if you say something in the digital media space, it is now we've had a 25-year history of digital media. It can be pulled from the archives and a digital archives really easily. And I feel that people perhaps aren't given the understanding of just what you have said, that people can get new information and evolve their views, and their policy positions can move over time as they become more informed or consider new arguments or undergo new experiences that may change the way they think. Whereas I feel that a lot of our politicians perhaps had other prominent, you know, roles in the media before they were politicians that is in that digital archive from 2008 or 2009. I know mine is, and it was found when I ran for federal parliament, you know, And that can be so easily drawn and, you know, re-put back into the atmosphere, in the digital atmosphere now, without people having an opportunity to explain that, you know, hey, I was 23 years old and, you know, now I'm 35 and I have grown as a person and I've had some new experiences. So, you know, a lot of people are really cut short in public life, perhaps before they should be, because of this immediacy of the digital medium that we have. And it's not fair, but at the same time, it is what it is. But, you know, it does encourage people who have, you know, always been really cautious in their life and perhaps haven't experienced a lot, to run for public office, because, you know, if you've ever done anything or said anything, it can come back to haunt you and you're worried about it, you know, and not big things, you know, small things that, you know, the media are going to make a huge deal about. So as a result, we do get people who, you know, a lot of these vanilla characters running for public office because, you know, they've lived a life of cautiousness.
Yeah. It's so silly because the world, think how much the world changes in that period, you know? 10 years. It's just...
Yeah. The world changes, people meet new people travel new places, their worldview opens up, you know, their thought paradigm shifts, they might do more study, they might have an experience that impacts them. But, you know, people are the sum of their parts and they don't often have the opportunity to demonstrate that.
So what was running for federal parliament like? And what prompted the decision?
And it was something that I had always wanted to do, should the opportunity have presented itself. If I didn't, you know, I've moved from Sydney to Melbourne to Canberra, and I went back to Perth, my hometown, during COVID. And that's where I began my sort of political career, and the opportunity came up. So I took it, and I'm a firm believer that if opportunities come and they're a once in a lifetime type opportunity or something that doesn't come around very often, say yes, because the experience is always going to offer you a lot of growth. And it did give me a lot of growth, and it gave me a lot of new friends, and a lot of new connections. And it was something that was a total surprise for that to happen, whereas I feel a lot of people move into a particular town or city or borough or village or district, and plot their course and work their way through the ranks and think 15 years out, you know, I want to be the representative for X. I didn't do that, and it came along, and I said yes, and I ran for pre-selection and I won it, and then I was running for the seat. So I was pre-selected really quite late. I had 6 months between being selected as a candidate and the general election. It's hard work, asking for the trust of the community. It's difficult being a woman with no children, or a woman of childbearing age with no children. I'm not married. I didn't fit that cookie cutter concept of what people wanted a local politician to be. I couldn't authentically talk about experiences with childcare or kindergarten or raising a family. That was something that I found not me personally difficult, but that was something that I found the Liberal Party found difficult to market me. In our party, we like to market people and talk about the family, and talk about raising a family and talk about buying a family home in the suburbs. And I had done none of that. I'd bought 2 homes, which were apartments, in 2 cities, both of them 3 kilometres from the CBD, in an area known for bohemian music and, like gay protests, both suburbs in Perth and Melbourne, Mount Lawley and St Kilda. I'm a professional woman who started my own business. I don't go to netball on the weekend. I don't volunteer in the school canteen. I can't talk about my husband and supporting him. The Liberal Party found it very, very difficult to market me, and they found it very difficult to hear me. Now, even though I have been an advisor to 4 governments of the party in Canberra at the highest levels, I still did not face a great hearing when I said to people that I had known 25 years and worked on campaign strategy with, please don't send me out to another kindergarten or to a building site with a hard hat. I wanted to talk about opportunities for professional women building businesses, for young women in technology and innovation and entrepreneurialism. Me standing up talking about the challenges of raising a family is not authentic. And as it turns out, the party lost a number of seats to teal candidates. So for anyone who's listening who's not Australian focused, teal candidates were independent candidates that called themselves teals because the colour of the Conservative Party in Australia is blue, and the colour of the environment is green. And the teals thought they sat somewhere in the middle, which was the teal hue between blue and green, because they were environment focused, but also ran a very strong campaign around centrist politics and the inclusivity of women, and how women want to vote in general elections. And that's how women want to be supported in business, and how women think about social issues like inclusivity and workforce participation, not just the traditional childcare and health that the major parties like to label as women's issues. And so the Liberal Party's resistance, I feel, even though, it's my party, it's never not going to be my party. I will always work for the re-election of a Liberal government. I felt that there was some resistance in hearing what I was saying and adjusting the strategy accordingly to market me. And as it turns out, we lost a number of seats to women who are pretty much just like me, because they marketed themselves the way I probably would have liked to have been marketed.
So how did that make you feel?
Well, you're part of a team, and not every part of the strategy is going to benefit every part of that team. I ran for the 6th most marginal seat in the country. It was an election where there was a significant swing on against our government. Women turning against our government was a large part of that. Given the numbers, I don't think that I could have won. And I always thought, it's 2.7%. It's a seat we've held for 15 years. I always thought I'd lose or just scrape over the line if the wind blew our way. I never had any delusions that I would win in a landslide or that I had it in the bag at all. I've done politics 20-odd years. I know what the numbers are. But it really did occur to me that, perhaps I would have had a better experience and been more true to my authentic self, should I have been able to have the opportunity to be marketed a little bit more the way I wanted to.
Yeah, this seems like a problem, because where are women supposed to go? I guess women who want to, have similar values, like they are entrepreneurially driven, or, want to have a career, want to be just like a normal fucking woman in today's world, but then also maybe want to, have the freedom to whatever, have a family, all of that, and then explore their values. Because I guess that goes back to that point of like liberal values versus conservative values. So liberal values being more around the free market stuff and having free, open conversation and being allowed to have different views and developing that way, versus the conservative values of like maybe putting women in a box more. But it just seems like the world's moved on so far from that. Like I've only lived in cities, but it's like it just seems so outdated, them trying to...
Well, even in, it's interesting you say cities, Delia, because regional Australia is actually really, really progressive. People who work in the agriculture sector out there in regional Australia, women are developing technology. They're on equal footing with men in farm management and agricultural leadership. The National Party, which is the country party for anyone else listening, the agricultural party traditionally, is way ahead of the Liberal Party in selecting women and young women in winnable regional seats. In Victoria, they are doing extremely well, selecting young women, almost at parity with young men. And regional Australia, because it's had to adapt and commercialise, it is really... yes, of course, there's, difficult issues in small towns and difficult issues in regional Australia as there are anywhere else. But it's more progressive out in regional Australia than a lot of people might care to think. But in terms of, look, major parties fight for the magic 38%. So the Labor Party won the election in Australia last May with 32.5% of the vote. The coalition won 36% of the vote, with preferencing of independents and minor parties. So again, for anybody who's listening, Australia does not have a first past the post system. Australia has a series of complicated preferential voting systems where votes from each candidate are exhausted and passed to another, and preference negotiations between major parties and independents is a significant body of work before any general election, unlike in the UK and the United States. So our complicated preferential voting system means that the disaffection of people to vote for major parties sees their vote go to independents. Those independents do not preference the coalition. So the coalition, despite getting a higher percentage of the vote than Labor, will always lose if they get a higher percentage of the vote that is under 51%. So parties market their candidates and market their policies and tweak their strategy so they win. They want to win that 40% of the vote, and that's the centre vote. And both parties have challenges outside that block of the centre vote, which consists of families, full-time husband working, nuclear family, full-time husband working, mum part-time, 3 kids in the outer suburbs. That's the centre of Australia. That's the biggest part of the population. Anybody else who's not in that strategy, they're not likely to be marketed to by major parties. They might be marketed to by an independent. They might be marketed to by Greens. They might be marketed to a little bit by Liberal candidates in some seats or Labor candidates in some seats. But by and large, major parties need to win that 40% in the centre. And so everybody else who doesn't particularly resonate with those strategies either feels I'm really a Labor voter or I'm really a Liberal voter, so I'm still going to vote for them, or they've got enough of philosophy and ideology that I believe in that I'm still going to vote for them, or, I'm really sick of not hearing what's relevant to me, so I'm going to vote for that independent who is kind of making sense to me because they represent me, And that's what a lot of women felt, professional women, women who had families and children, and women who were professional who don't have families and children. But that is what a lot of women heard, the marketing of independents who they felt were relevant to them, while the Liberal Party and the Labor Party tried to outdo each other on the 40% in the outer suburbs in the centre.
And what was, talking about some of those things that were brought up from your past, like what were some of the hardest things while you were running or the worst attacks on you, or like, were you affected by any of that stuff, or it wasn't too bad?
It was, I don't want to disparage my opponent. There was a Labor politician in the upper house in Western Australia who got up under parliamentary privilege and told lies about me and my background. They had gone through my LinkedIn profile and tried to piece it together. And it wasn't true. And it was terrible language and terrible accusations done under parliamentary privilege, which they then printed out the speech and gave to a journalist who could print it because it was said under parliamentary privilege. In the real world, you would sue somebody for an open and shut defamation case. In the political world, you have to accept that that's just a bit par for the course. And it's not right, and it's not appropriate, and it's not what I would ever do. But, the Labor Party plays pretty dirty sometimes.
So how did you cope with that?
You just have to.
And I guess you can rely on the support of the people around you, and You
just have to. But, it's absolutely nothing compared to... that was done by another female politician, right? That's sport. That's just the sport. That's just politics. What is actually very damaging is getting trolled, attacked, threats from the general public, which I got. But there are female politicians in our parliaments all around the world, in the UK, in Australia, in the US, that are almost hunted by haters on social media. And it is disgusting, and it is something that befalls female politicians far worse and in higher volume than it affects male politicians. And it's more an insidious hatred targeted towards female politicians.
And what do you think it's about?
I think it's people, there's a cohort of people out there who want to attack women in a vicious way. And we know that. We know that violence is far more prevalent in our community than most people would like to admit. Physical violence, emotional violence, coercive control, mental manipulation, violence and aggression is just more prominent than we would ever like to admit in our communities. And this expression of hatred towards female politicians by keyboard warriors is an example of the pervasiveness of violence and aggression in our community, of men who, feel perhaps powerless, or I don't know why, but feel that they want to attack women.
So for you,
and they can do it through social media.
It was mostly coming from men.
For me, it was mostly coming from organised lobby groups of activists. So trans activists, environmental activists, pro-life activists, and it's men who like to abuse me about my appearance and say terrible, nasty things on social media.
What do activists...
It's a lot of women.
What do activists... Because there's one group, if it's just random people attacking you on the internet, that's just horrible. But I guess in some way, is it kind of easier to ignore because it's someone who's clearly like the type of person to go and make that random attack, versus someone who's like from an activist group? Like, what do they think they're trying to achieve if they're just attacking you? Like, wouldn't the better way be to, like, how would that possibly further their cause? Or is it some kind of intimidation to make you weaker or something like that?
Activists target you in a mobilised way where you are piled on by 50 to 100 of them around something that you may have said of a topic that they were offended by. And they generally pick on your appearance. And so, the trans lobby picked on me for my appearance and for my view that I think there are people who identify as men when they're women. There are women who identify as men. There are people who suffer greatly with gender identity issues their whole life. But there are others who perhaps are not in the category of having had suffered with gender identity issues their whole life and are perhaps engaging in, a binary identification. And so I was picked on by the trans lobby and attacked by them quite significantly.
Which is just like tons of messages come at you saying...
Tons of messages come at you on your social media constantly. The activist websites ramp up. The activist online magazines ramp up. There's concentrated social media campaigns about you. And it is not necessarily trying to engage you in a debate about an issue. It is trying to pick on your appearance and make you feel horrible about yourself.
So were you able to kind of shut some of this stuff out, or did it get to you?
Well, again, it comes back to what we were saying before. You have to have an authentic view about what you believe. And that's what I believe. I think that's balanced, right? That's considering everybody and taking in everybody's arguments. And I'm happy with that view. So that's my authentic view. And so I'm not, I'm not angry at saying that, and I'm not upset about that. That's my authentic view. You're never going to please all of the people all of the time.
And then the random hateful attacks.
Random hateful attacks came about my appearance on a regular basis because people hate conservative women.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I'll rephrase that. There's a cohort of people out there who want to pick on women in the public eye. And a lot of those people are more motivated to pick on women in the public eye who have conservative values. But it is not unique. The trolling and the hatred and the nastiness, it's not unique to conservative politicians or conservative female politicians. It's female people in the public eye in general. TV presenters, actresses, journalists, politicians. It's an epidemic of people wanting to express violence and aggression towards women in the public eye through nasty social media.
And I guess famously Julia Gillard received a lot of, but that was like within Parliament and from journalists and quite.
Well, it's also from within Parliament. It also is. And Julia Gillard has had one of the most dignified, meaningful post-political careers of any politician, I think, in recent Australian history. And she was always kind to me on the few occasions I ran into her. And I know from working in politics for such a long time, Julia Gillard is one of those politicians who is revered amongst staff as someone who is wonderful to work for, is kind, and has people return to working with her on many, many occasions. And there are not that many politicians like that.
So what do you think can be done about this attacks on women? And is it kind of obvious because, it's like, okay, everyone gets attacked, but when the attacks are about you being a woman, that's when it's different for men. Because I know men get upset about this stuff, but it's like no one attacks men about the fact that they're a man or like about what they look like necessarily. Or
no one attacks men about being a woman, or no one attacks men with threats of sexual or physical violence. That is the difference. Women in the public eye routinely receive social media threats of physical and sexual violence, which is not the same as a male politician being attacked.
So what?
Everybody's attacked. If you're in the public eye, everybody's attacked. You accept that. It's bad. It's just the way it is. But the constant, threats of sexual and physical violence towards you from people on the internet is something that doesn't happen to men.
So I guess, is it just education, like teaching people that it's please don't.
Yeah, well, I think governments are now doing a lot with social media, working with police and working with the social media companies. There's new laws around making threats of physical and sexual violence online You can request, somebody's telco activity. You can track who they are. It's a lot better than it used to be. And there are people who lead this in public life. Holly Hughes, Senator for New South Wales, has really led this charge in highlighting what happens to female politicians and trying to do something about it. Erin Molan from the Sky Network, my colleague at Sky, she has really highlighted it as well. Women are standing up and showing people what these messages are, and police and governments are doing a lot more about it. So, yeah, but education, I mean, we need to start with young boys and talk to them and educate them about social media and about violence. And I think we're getting there as a society. There's a long way to go, but it's got a lot more recognition and attention than it has in previous generations. I mean, nobody spoke about it when I went to school. Nobody.
Did your mum experience similar things?
No, because there wasn't social media. Social media has given a voice to violence against women.
It's interesting because Tom McDonald, who plays football for Melbourne, was on this podcast, and he talked about within football, it's like, yeah, people, you get abuse, but it's people, Aboriginal players or people like non-white players are receiving more, and it's racially targeted.
Yeah.
So
just as there's a cohort of people out there who want to make threats of physical and sexual violence against women, there's a cohort of people out there who want to make racially motivated threats against Indigenous people of prominence, whether they be sports people or politicians or journalists or actors or and just there is a nasty culture of cohorts of people who are motivated by hatred towards certain groups, women and, people of colour.
Okay. Is there anything else you want to say before we wrap up and I ask you the last 3 questions?
No, you can ask me the last 3 questions.
Okay. Is there a book that's had a big impact on your life?
I'm a great consumer of novels, right? And for better or for worse, I love contemporary American fiction about the real American experience. And I love Curtis Sittenfeld, and I love A.M. Holmes. I think she is absolutely hilarious. And I love Lionel Shriver. And even before that, anything written by Tom Wolfe. I love Bonfire of the Vanities, A Man in Full, I Am Charlotte Simmons. Incredible, really American society satire, which I love. And so that is not one book, but that is a thematic of books, I would say.
And how do you stay grounded?
I run fast and for a long time. And I'm from a town of 4,000 people. That's I don't have any choice.
And last question, what 3 words describe the best version of you? Which, by the way, I've noticed politicians feel awkward about answering this. I just had John Anderson on, and Tony Abbott had the same response, that they're like, oh, I don't want to sound arrogant, but it's like, what? That's not the point of the question. The point of the question is like the person who you like most strive to be, like the values that you most try and turn up as, which you've already talked a lot about authenticity. But that's the point.
So, well, I won't say authenticity because I've said that, but interested in others and their experience. Funny, because if you can make people laugh and you can laugh with someone rather than at them, never at them, that's a really human experience to share with someone in so many situations, good and bad. So the best version of myself is funny and entertaining to bring compassion and comfortability to others. And kindness, like, why be nasty when you don't have to? And so they're probably my 3.
Amazing. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having me, Delia. This has been great. I hope it was interesting. And I hope people can understand my bad Western Australian accent if they are listening from other countries. But I've explained where I'm from so they know where I get it. So, yeah.